So sorry about being hidden, but it's nice to see you all. So we are all here. David Haywood will be joining us the second hour. He has a meeting that he has to attend to the first hour. So whenever you're ready. We are ready to get started.
Dan, you're muted. You're still muted.
Never gets easier, does it, Dan? Take your time.
That looks like you got it.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
There we go. We
Okay.
can hear you now.
It was, well, it's still kind of coming in and out. It was, it's still giving me sort of this scrolly waiting screen, but I guess for now it'll work. If I've got the printed material, so if you're going to share screen, there might be a glitch, but I think it's for whatever we've got. I guess it's going to work out for the time being. Let me open up the agenda here. Yeah, we're trying to manage. Sorry, but the both of my children and my wife are using up all the good devices right now for school and for their work. So I've got the iPad. That said, we will. I saw that, and I don't see you right now still, but I saw that Cindy and Chris were both on the screen a short time ago. So I will presume that both of you are there. I heard Darcy say that David will join us shortly. So right now it's Darcy and Rebecca, Chris, Cynthia, and myself. Anyone else present?
There is not.
Okay.
We do have one caller.
Okay. Do we want to handle that? I see public inputs at the end of the agenda.
Yes.
Okay. So I'll just I guess I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda that was distributed with our packet.
So moved.
This is Cynthia, support.
There's only three of us. That makes it a little tricky.
We do
All
that.
right. So moved by Mr. Wolf and seconded by Ms. Williams. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please. Let's just do a voice vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed. All right. So the agenda is in place. The first item on the agenda is miscellaneous document edits. I'm still getting this scrolling thing, but I see you periodically, each of you periodically when you talk. So perhaps when that is posted, it will show up on my screen as well. Is this Darcy? Will you handle this first part, or is this something that you wanted us to run with?
Yeah, actually, I understand that Chris for sure has some edits in other parts of the document. I have a couple that I have questions about, and just some edits that are needed because we've changed some other sections of the code that I just want to quickly go over. So I figured we'd start with any of your edits needed, the three of you, to any section of the code except for the administration.
Okay, well, that being the case, I know, Chris, you said you had several things. If there are no objections, why don't we start with the things that you've got and proceed from there?
Well, Actually, I do not have any of those ready. What I was saying in the emails a week or two ago was that I needed a copy of what our current document is, because after the last meeting, I did not keep track of which ones we had already discussed. I got partway through them and I was kind of at a loss. I don't really want to go through ones that have already been incorporated or dismissed or whatever. So and Darcy said we would have that copy after the meeting. And I had asked, do we have a full agenda with other stuff? And understood that we did. So I didn't prepare those at all.
Okay.
All right. Then Cindy, do you have any miscellaneous document edits? I've got a couple of things to talk about, but it sounds like Darcy wanted to wait to talk about administration, the sort of the stuff that was distributed and as well as the timeline. Cindy, did you have anything miscellaneous to include?
No, I guess I understood we had a full agenda, so I wasn't looking to clutter it up with anything else.
No worries. So it sounds like we're all, at least some of us, I guess, we're on a similar page. I've got some stuff to talk about with the stuff that was distributed. So if that's the case, then Darcy, you feel comfortable with just moving on to item 3 then?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I don't know how you would like to proceed through this. Do you want to just start on page 1 and go through with any questions or concerns you have from the beginning?
That sounds good. Are there any?
So we start out with application of regulations. Are there any concerns with that section?
This is the table that shows when review would be required and the degree to which that review would be, whether sort of comprehensive or just basic. I've got that. We're calling that page 5. I've got a note. Okay, yep.
That's that page 5 isn't really about the review, right? It's about which parts of the code are you required to comply with?
Correct.
Or, I thought Dan was describing the table on my page 7, but
Hold on. Nope, I meant page 5. Right, I do mean page 5. This is the area where we talked about, or where it's determined, like for instance, well, you can see it, that if less than 20 or 20% or less of the area is included, then certain portions of the avenue form code would not be applicable, and for work that includes a major building modifications, the entire code would be applicable. Now, the only question I have here is something that had come up, I think, perhaps during the comprehensive plan discussion, and that was that, and I think there's actually a provision in the zoning code that if changes are made to existing buildings, say for instance, I'm thinking along, say, Grand River, but the application doesn't really matter, that if a homeowner or a building owner wanted to change the height, but only wanted to add 1 story, I think there was accommodation within, I'll say within zoning, that would allow them to expand, but not to expand to the height that would typically be expected in the, say, along Grand River in the more dense zones. I think we've talked about this previously, but just sort of in this sort of doing this additional review, that I'll say objection or concern came to mind.
And I think that's a good point, Dan. We need to look at that and how that's handled in our current zoning code, because that was a big issue with existing buildings that may just want to do something like add one story.
That's right.
So I can look at that and see, make a recommendation how to fit that in.
Right. And keeping in mind the fact that we're, coming out of the gate with this, there's going to be an expectation that there's going to be some, there's going to be we've said this before, a lot of existing non-conforming properties, and that measures taken to bring those into closer compliance obviously would be better than leaving them non-compliant. But the degree to which that would be done is reflected on this table. And so if the expansion of the building area, say for instance, if a second story is added to a one-story building, that's clearly more than 20% of the building area. But
Right.
it of course brings the building into closer compliance, I'll say ideal compliance, and probably ought to be discouraged. I know we've talked about this in the past, but it's just, again, reviewing this, the issue came back to mind again. That was the only thing that I had on this page.
Dan, are you calling on us for this, or can you see me?
Yes, I can.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
sorry. You're
I've
raising
been
your
raising my hand a few times, and I wasn't
I'm
sure
sorry.
if you could see.
I can, so I guess, thanks for accommodating me. If you do need to talk, maybe either say my name or cough or something like that, because when you speak, you show up on my screen. So thanks, Chris. I
Okay.
can see you now. Thanks.
I actually have quite a few comments and concerns about this page 5 altogether. And the one that you just brought up is related to one of those that's somewhat minor, but I think we need to clear up. And that was when we say expansion of the building area. When I read that, it's not clear whether that means the footprint of the building on the ground or let's call it the gross floor area. And I think we should clear that up. Just now in your comments, you were treating it as if it meant the gross floor area.
I was.
And
And
that's fine
what
with me. So Darcy, you feel that's the way it is?
Yes, and we were right. We should make that clear somewhere. Could we add it to the note? Or just to the description, say expansion of building floor area.
I don't know, either one could probably work.
Let's
And
do
so-
it, just add building floor area, and that just makes it cleaner.
Yeah, so you see it immediately without having to look at the footnote.
Right.
I guess further on that same item, what the chart shows is that in the scenario Dan was just talking about, if you wanted to add one floor to a one-story building, not only would it, as it's written right now, it would require you to have to add more stories. You'd have to go up to the minimum height for that district. But you would also have to meet almost every other standard for the entire building, which I would think would be very discouraging of those kind of additions.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess my question is that really what we want? Or, I mean, they would have to correct the whole facade. They'd have to change all the windows to meet the code, and building entrances could be no farther than a certain distance apart. I mean, they'd have to meet the placement. They'd have to meet the required building line. Seems like that's just not going to happen.
Good question. I think the intention was that that's the case. However, we do have the section of our current ordinance that was recently changed to allow buildings within I believe it's, within the DDA, but I'm not positive. I'll have to look that up, to add a story. And we could limit this to just allowing a story.
We could make that a special case of
For the DDA.
an expansion of the building area.
Right.
So would that go in another footnote then, or?
You know, I'd have to think about that a little bit more. Do you have any thoughts?
I suppose it could go as a line.
I think we need to add it as another row.
So it would be something like adding a single story to an existing building within whatever the DDA or whatever the area is defined as.
Right.
I have a question. I guess I'm searching my memory here. We had a few conversations about limiting the scope of this form-based code to shrink it down to what wasn't a whole lot different than the DDA.
For now.
Right, but
Right.
so then would we have to make an exception to what we're trying to do here, or do we need to clarify the footprint of the applicability of the code?
It's a good question, because it's kind of one of those situations where that's the recommendation that Planning Commission is going to make. But in the event that the city council chooses to expand that, we would want to differentiate that. So it's kind of going to be changed one way or another, depending on how that recommendation is taken.
It's kind of a what goes first kind of question, I guess.
I know, it's really, this entire code is like that.
I think even as we have it right now, the M, what we had been talking about was implementing all of the M, I'm losing my frontages, I guess, is what they're called.
Yeah,
Forgetting my
right.
terminology again already. Implementing all of the M's, but postponing the R's. The M's already cover quite a bit more than the DDA. I mean, they extend
That's true.
well to the west on Michigan and Grand River, and cover part of Harrison, and I don't remember everything, but they are quite a bit larger.
I guess I just want to just raise a caution that we be careful when we start like limiting the applicability of sections internally, that we don't somehow cause confusion about the applicability of the form-based code in general.
That's a good point. And it might be, like I said, the way we frame it, I think, is going to be important, and maybe we don't add it as a row. Maybe it is a footnote. But I think it is important to add, just because we just recently added that to the code for those existing buildings that may not be redeveloping for years, but may want to add one story.
Another possible way to handle it would be to actually expand that exception and apply it to all of the new M zones, allow any of them to add a story. Wonder if there's a good argument for that. That, in a way, that would be simpler, because we wouldn't have to make a reference to a separate area like the DDA.
Right. As long as we limit it to the M zones.
Right.
Or, I don't know, does it make sense that we just said a story period, because most of the residential area either have already added the story or maxed out, or it's going to be rare that they would utilize that, but they may have a situation where it makes sense.
Well, I guess then you could continue asking, well, if we're going to allow everyone to add a whole story, then why, if they want to add 400 square feet of a footprint to the to a what, a 1,300 square foot house, why do we prohibit that? Or not, we wouldn't prohibit it, but we would be forcing them to meet all of the requirements.
Maybe we look at it as the difference between floor area and footprint. If they're wanting to expand the footprint, that's where we draw the line in the DDA. So maybe we have two divisions here, one that says expansion of the building floor area that doesn't expand the footprint. And then or expansion of floor area that expands the footprint. And then expansion of building without, because you could go expansion of the building without expanding the footprint. You could go to 100%.
Yeah, but that's what we were already talking about. But what I'm saying is, well, if you're looking at let's say the DDA area, the way that permission was enabled now in our code, there is no way in most cases to expand the footprint of a building. They're pretty much all built up. The only way they can go is higher. So there it sort of makes sense to allow it, but if you start moving into what would be the R frontages, then you do have open space, and there would be many property owners would have a choice of expanding the footprint or going up. And what I'm saying is, why would we treat those differently? Why would we let them go up with 100% change or increase in floor area with no need to meet the other parts of the code? Yet, if they wanted to do a 25% increase in footprint, then they have to meet every or almost every part of the new code. I can see somebody as looking at that as being very unfair. And again, going back to the current rule, there's almost nobody in the DDA who really has the opportunity to put on a 25% or 30% addition to their footprint. So it's simply not an issue.
Down by Crunchies, we have that area that they could.
On Crunchy's property?
Well, yeah, Crunchy's property, that area, has that been made all public? Good
You're talking about where the Big B was?
Crunchies, yeah. Around where that plaza is, where Crunchies is located.
I don't,
That is
Crunchy's,
all, that could be expanded. They own
Crunchy's,
that property.
I'm still not sure. Crunchy's Crunchy's building.
Crunchies. Not Crunchies, the Peanut Barrel, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Yes, I wouldn't say there are no cases like that at all. You're right. That is one that would apply, but
wouldn't it, if the intention, of course, the broadest intention of the code here is to shape the public space with the private buildings. I think your point is well taken, Chris, is that those places where we already have zero lot line buildings, and if you go back to Crunchies, in as much as they don't have it built out all the way to the sidewalk. They're certainly occupied their front patio comes out to the sidewalk and holds a line.
Crunchies or peanut barrel?
I actually mean crunchies.
Okay.
But that those places where there's not an existing footprint at or close to the lot line, that's exactly the sort of thing that the form-based code is trying to encourage in order to shape the public space with the building. I don't have an answer to the riddle here. It's just that I'm agreeing with you that there is a difference. When you get further and further east on Grand River, where we're still in the M zone, but clearly the buildings weren't built anywhere near to the front property line, which is, again, that's, I think, that ultimately what's trying to be encouraged. It's a different, it's just a different way of looking at things. And maybe if it's not to define it by the DDA, you define it by the existing setback.
I guess I can see making an exception of some sort for adding a single story in an area. I mean, another way we could do it is do it for the M5 or no, what is our highest number? Four, sorry.
M4, yep.
Because that pretty well corresponds, it corresponds to the B3 mostly.
That's right.
Covers a lot of the DDA. I don't think it would be a good idea to apply it to the R. I think that would be quite a step beyond. One reason to think of it that way is that, but part of the reason that you require certain additions and so forth, when someone wants to do a type of renovation addition, you require them to meet the code 100%, is that you want to discourage some of that. We really want to encourage redevelopment. So we don't want too many properties to improve theirs and make them, really nice for the next 30 years when there's a chance of redeveloping them instead. So we got to keep that in mind.
Right.
So I think I'd be in favor of a way that we can leave that right for the more or less the same buildings that have it now in the DDA, the right to add a story without doing very much else. But I would say we shouldn't expand that to too much of a bigger area.
So maybe we just put a footnote on 0% to 20% of the building area minor, and then put down there an exception is that a building in the M4 may expand as much as 100% as long as the footprint's not being expanded, something to that effect.
Wouldn't it be simpler to say they may add a second story? Because isn't the current one that specific?
No, but I'm trying to, it made it clear that it was only one story, but I'm trying to think how to blend it into how our language is here. I'll look at it and see, compare it.
Just one question. What is the current one? Does it apply only to one-story buildings, or does it also apply to a two-story that wants to add a story?
That's a good question. I think it's any building that wants to add one story. But I'm not positive. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Is it, yeah, I think it's only in the B3, and the DDA actually expands further than that, so maybe it is just in the B3.
Well, that would make it easy to choose the M4, I think.
Right.
I guess the M4 would actually be expanding it a little because the M4 now takes in part of the East Village, doesn't it?
Right.
But that's okay, I guess. Or maybe it's not. You know, maybe we want those buildings to redevelop.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it here. Maybe it's in a different area. Yeah, it's gonna take me a little more time to pull that language up. Don't wanna waste our time here too much.
That's fine. And I actually think that's something that I think we run some danger trying to change it on the fly as well. I think the concern is noted, and it's probably something we ought to give some thought to how to address that.
Sounds good.
All right. Chris, you had other?
Yeah, and I hope I can explain these coherently, because I even have trouble getting them straight in my head. But let me start. Actually, start at the bottom of the page with C,
Mm-hmm.
which is applicability to non-conforming uses. Says that shall be regulated under 50-852, which I believe is not the right reference. It should be 853. 852, 852 is non-conforming use of land where no structure is involved. And 853,
Right. Correct that.
853 is non-conforming use of a structure.
Yep, I'll correct
So-
that.
Now, we could potentially have a place where we had a non-conforming use of land with no structure, but the odds of that are extremely low, I think.
Yeah.
So then that leads into I think we have maybe a terminology problem, or all right, let me back up again here. Under our current code, if you look at those 850, 851, 52, 53, 54, we spend quite a bit of time on non-conforming uses. And relatively little of the code is devoted to non-conformities other than use. And the way it works out is if you have a non-conforming use of a structure, specifically of a structure, then you cannot enlarge it without making the use conforming, except for we put in some special exceptions for the non-conforming rentals. We went through that a few years ago with a committee, and so you cannot enlarge it, and you cannot structurally alter it or reconstruct it, which basically means changing a load-bearing wall or that type of thing. And again, there's exceptions for that for rentals. For non-conformities other than use, which would mean things like a structure that has a non-conforming setback or too much ground coverage, or with those, the only thing, let's see, no changes can be made that increase the non-conformity. So that's fairly lenient. Also, there are quite a few things you can do to a non-conforming structure as long as you don't make the non-conformity worse.
Mm-hmm.
In in the past, we have had, well, you know, I was on the Zoning Board of Appeals, so we often heard things related to nonconformities. And we had a fair number of non-conforming uses and a fair number of non-conforming structures. Under the new code, if we put this code into effect, I think we are going to have almost 100% non-conforming structures. Does anybody disagree with that? I mean, with all of our, Darcy?
I agree. Yep.
Yeah. So that's going to be a major issue. At the same time, we are expanding the uses that are allowed. So in theory, we should probably have fewer non-conforming uses in the future. One of the big issues in that regard is the rental occupancy, let's call it, issues, because we really haven't addressed those in the form-based code. We have things like Ordinance 900, which is a major cause of houses being non-conforming rentals, you know, legally allowed non-conforming rentals. So we're going to have to decide whether Ordinance 900 is going to be changed to include some of the new R districts. If we don't do that, then a whole bunch of those things in Bailey, for example, may become may become conforming.
I think politically that we risk a lot not including and I think we've done that, and you may not have seen that version of it because that's the version that I told you quite some time ago that the uses within the district were not complete. Section 8 or Part 8.
Okay.
And we've worked on that quite a bit, and that'll be one of your, as soon as we get all this other stuff wrapped up, that'll be your next review. But we did include all of the requirements for rentals that currently are in our code.
All right, that's good. So, with that in mind, looking at page 5, my first question is about terminology, because the terminology has changed from what it used to be. If you look at heading B, it says applicability to non-conforming structures. But then the first sentence under it says for non-conforming properties. And then the top of the table, table 201, says applicability to non-conforming properties. Those are, a property and a structure are different. And I think we need to make sure what we're talking. What's that?
Change those to structure?
Well, I'm not sure, because there are other aspects of a property that could be non-conforming that are unrelated to structures, I believe. And I'm not quite sure how to get those captured. I mean, what about, for example, something like our requirements for ground coverage? That's independent of a structure. I'm trying to think in the new code, the form-based code. Is a fence a structure?
No.
Okay, because we do have requirements in there under elements, and I've forgotten where that would apply.
So maybe the title just needs to say applicability to non-conforming properties.
Well, the problem I have with that is a property can be non-conforming because of its use, can it not?
It could be, but we're separating them by,
The,
see.
the way that's handled in the current code is that it starts out with non-conforming, non-conforming use of a structure. And then the next part of the code says non-conformity other than use. Of
So
course,
just change it to applicability to non-conforming other than use. Would that clear that up?
Well, you're still going to have the building form standard that pertains to uses in your table, so that's going to be confusing.
But we're applying the section 5853 to any nonconformities of use. So that's covered in C.
Okay.
So we're saying that the heading B would say applicability to non-conformities other than use.
Yes. Would that?
Yes, I think that would be a good start. And then the table heading, table 201, the same change.
Yep.
All right.
You just
Can
don't
I,
think you don't think it's going to be odd to a reader to then look across to the right of the heading, height, place, the building form standards, height, placement, elements, uses. I mean, it's other than use, except for this building form standard that pertains to uses. Isn't that just going to look strange?
Yeah, that's true.
I guess I don't understand. To me, it makes sense. Can you explain further why it looks strange? I'm not seeing that.
Well, you're going to say applicability to non-conforming structures other than uses?
Right, but this is, the columns across the top are just saying.
Right, no, I understand. I just
Yeah.
think the language is going to, maybe it's just me.
no, it's not just you.
Oh,
I'm going to take a sidetrack here, if that's okay. One of the things I find useful about when we meet in person is that in as much as we take public comment at the end of the meeting, the participants or the attendees are still there and periodically chime in. I just got a note from one of our, I'll say somebody that's waiting to participate. And I'm curious if, Rebecca, are you still there?
Yes, I am. There's nobody waiting as an attendee.
Okay, this person had said to me that they're listening in and wasn't sure if they'd be around at the end. I was going to propose that we periodically check in with the attendees and see if they want to participate. But if that person is gone now, I guess I'll leave it at that then. I hate to put an additional burden on you, Rebecca, but perhaps when people come and go, maybe I'm just trying to accommodate what would, it makes things go, particularly if it's not David Pearson, but if it were David Pearson or Chris Root or somebody that's been pretty helpful in providing input, I sure would like to hear if they've got some thoughts about what we're talking about, rather than waiting to the end and getting, sort of down a path that we would have been able to avoid and perhaps improve on had they been available slightly earlier. I'll just read, if it's okay. I saw that I got a note here. I apologize. This might very well be the person. Hang on, sorry. They're just watching the live stream. They're not actually participating. If it's okay, I'll just throw this. It's from Brian. It's a note from Brian Hagan saying that their office on 927 East Grand River would be a good example of what we're discussing regarding adding to an existing building. They had previously proposed and were approved for the addition of another story. They've not done the addition, but thought it would be he thinks it would be a good discussion piece. He's saying that he suspects that anybody looking to add an additional story might also need the flexibility to add to the footprint, perhaps at the rear, if nothing else for an addition of a second stairway or an elevator. He's saying that redevelopment in this area will prove to be difficult, and of course they've tried, because of the number of parcels you need to acquire and the variety of different owners that control all of them, of course. So I don't know that necessarily, I think it's good input. I don't know that adds to a potential solution for us, but just trying to work through the difficulty of working remotely might not be a terrible idea to invite people to join in as participants rather than as just attendees. My thoughts.
Not a bad idea.
Again, it's sort of, it seems like we have so few people actually attending ever. And I've always felt that sort of having David or Chris or whomever, Brian's been there before, David Kraus, having their input at the time, I think would be helpful. All right, sorry, we can move back to the original line of discussion if you'd like.
Yeah, on the issue of structures versus properties, maybe we need to look at that just a little bit more so that we understand what in the form-based code, what the difference would be. If we applied this simply to non-conforming structures versus expanding it to cover non-conforming properties, what additional characteristics would come into play if it covered any non-conformity on the property versus the structure? So I think we probably can't make that choice right now at this meeting, or at least I don't think I could.
Could I, so I'm thinking in terms of the non-conforming property that's not building related might be lot size or front property line width, right? Those are the things that we're talking about. Sometimes there's a minimum lot size established or a minimum width established, or trying to think of those are entirely unrelated to the structure, but would make the land effectively non-conforming.
Yeah, things like, what about something like the setback of the parking area?
All right.
We have requirements for that. That's not related to a structure.
Right.
I'm sure there's a number of other ones. In a sense, all right, maybe I'm worrying about something that doesn't matter. Getting back to my earlier comment, if we put the form-based code into effect, we're going to have almost 100% non-conforming structures.
Agreed.
So maybe that makes it a moot point by itself. It's hard to imagine where we would have a conforming structure and have something else non-conforming on the property that would trigger it instead. So maybe we can take that practical approach that it's not going to matter. In that case, I might say, all right, let's use the terminology from our current code, which, as far as I know, does not refer to non-conforming properties, but does refer to structures and uses. So maybe we can indeed stick with structures and uses. So in that case, it would mean leaving heading B the same as it is, changing the first sentence under B to say for non-conforming structures, and changing the heading of the table 201, applicability to non-conforming structures.
Everyone good with that? I'm good with that.
Yep.
I think that's fine.
All right. As I said, I've had not worked through all these myself. Let's look at a specific thing in the table. Under if we have under changes in use in the table, we have sort of a gap there. The first row talks about no additional parking. The second row talks about expanding it by more than 10%. What if it is expanding parking by 5%? That doesn't fall under either one of them. Seems like we need to close that gap. Possibly by changing the first one that says, to say requires no building addition, or let's see, and less than 10% additional parking.
Yep.
Or something of that nature.
I think that works.
I think you mean or though. It's one or either one or the other. It doesn't trigger it, right?
It does not require a building addition or more than 10% additional parking, yes.
Yeah.
But I also have a question about that definition. The first one talks about additional parking. When I hear that, read that, my first thought is the number of parking spaces, the number of vehicles that can be parked. The line below it talks about the percentage of the parking lot, which to me means area, not parking spaces. Now, maybe that's just me, but it seems to me as though this would be clearer if we said what we mean by it. Do we mean vehicle spaces, or do we mean the amount of land that the parking takes up?
I would say the amount of land again.
Is there some simple way to get that in there without making the wording too complicated into both of them? Because even with the second one, I can see somebody arguing that might mean the number of spaces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll figure something out.
Okay, I mean, that one probably could say expand the parking lot area by more than 10%.
Yeah.
And the first one, I'm not quite sure how you'd work that in, but that would clear that up. Okay, looking at that same section again, changes in use. Those two types of change in use that we just talked about, those two rows, have only two impacts on what's required. The fourth column, which says building form standard uses, which actually I think building form standard is incorrect there, because I believe we removed the uses page from the building form standard section. We moved it to another spot. It used to be the fourth page of the building form standards for each of the districts. Anybody recall what I'm talking about?
I'm looking myself.
If you look at an older one, you'll see it. But, so I think it should say, we have it now in part 8, which is called building use standards.
Right. Oh, yeah, I think I see what you're saying now.
So that sideways bold heading in the fourth column should say building use standards. And then probably the non-bold uses could stay the same.
Good catch.
Okay, but that wasn't my main point there. What I was getting to is, so if you do a change in use that triggers either of those two rows, you're required to meet the use standards, and in one case, you're supposed to meet the placement requirements for parking. My question is for the uses. If there is a change of use in a building that has multiple uses, does that mean that only the new use has to meet our code, or would that trigger any existing non-conforming use to also meet the code?
So if there's a change in use, they just have to meet, just that particular business has to meet the use standards of the form-based code.
Okay, that's what I would,
Yeah.
that's what I would expect. So maybe we need a footnote on that one, because that's very similar to the concept that when you're putting on an addition, you may only need to have the addition meet the new code versus the entire building. It's similar to what's talked about in note number 1 for additions.
So put that right in change of use.
What was that?
Put the footnote just on the end of change in use, and then just state in multiple family or multiple use buildings.
I don't know. What if you were to put it in the building use standard column? Would that be clearer if the footnote number 2, I guess it is, would be put on the X in that column?
Whatever makes more sense to you all.
That makes a little more sense to me, because it really only applies to that column, whereas for footnote number 1 up above, it applies to every column.
So footnote 2 goes on both of the X's in that column.
Right.
So just something to the fact that it only applies to the use changing.
Right. If there is a change in use, any new uses must conform to the code. Existing uses are not required to. That would be the gist of it.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I would hope we don't have too much of that because we are relaxing or expanding the uses allowed. And then I guess this is the last one. I still have some concerns about the amount of changes that some of these things would require. In particular, looking at the last line, the facade changes. The idea that if you make a change in the facade, you then have to become 100% compliant with the elements and also with the architectural materials. At least that's the implication of it, right? You'd have to make your the entire facade compliant. Did you say yes, Darcy?
Yeah, that's what that's saying, but we want just the architectural standards?
Well, I don't know. An example that occurred to me, suppose someone wants to change the awning on their building. That falls under facade. If you look at the code, they would have to change all of their windows and doors and materials, and I mean, they'd have to rebuild the whole front of the building in most cases. And there's numerous other things that fall under facade that are similar to that.
Everyone agree?
I don't know what to do about it. I like the idea of getting the buildings updated, but it seems burdensome.
Yeah, I agree that it seems burdensome. I'm just not sure I have a good feel right now for where I think we should mitigate that.
Right, same here.
How about just put this out there? I mean, I'm taking a look at the list of elements as fenestration, so doors and windows, having something having to do with the attic story, balconies, and then distance between facade entrances. That's the list of elements for the mixed use zone.
Well, no, actually it's not. You're looking at the table, right?
I am.
But I think we have to look at the text also. So if you go to page, where are we? Page 16, I have it. That's the beginning of the discussion of elements.
There we go. Thank you.
Pretty sure the way this is worded, all of page 16 and 17 would apply in addition to the table portion you were looking at.
Thanks. I'm just doing a quick glance at this.
Yeah.
I mean, short response is that I don't think that changing the awning should trigger a change in fenestration and so on.
Yeah.
What I was going to say, and let me keep flipping through here. I'm wondering if, I don't know if this is the right way to go about it. This just starts to get into stuff that's separated from what we would typically think of as form, right? This is the more the architectural elements. And I'm wondering if it's if it comes down to, a change in the fenestration, if proposed, would require an adherence or coordination with the fenestration requirements. A change in awnings would require conformance with the awning requirements, and so on. I know that's not what the table says right now, but that perhaps that's, if a change in materials would basically would require materials that match what's outlined in the code, as opposed to, as again, I agree with you that the way it's written would require all those things, but that maybe it should just affect the item under consideration.
So similar to the issue we just discussed previously with respect to uses.
Sure.
It's the
Yeah.
new use that has to conform. It's the new facade element that must conform.
Right. So you've got a multi-use building, now you've got a multi-element building, and only the element being impacted would be expected to be addressed. Just a thought.
That makes sense to me.
So that would actually make it comparable to the first line under expansion of building area, which kind of works the same way. If you're adding up to 20% of the building area, the new construction has to meet a variety of standards, but you don't have to change the rest of the building.
Yes.
So, for example, it would mean that if they decided they wanted to change the material treatment for the ground floor of the building, they wanted to put a new type of siding of some kind on it, or add more windows or whatever, then the entire ground floor, whatever new they were putting on would have to meet the material requirements, but they could leave upper story materials that didn't meet the standard.
Oh boy, I don't read it that way. You can split it by floor.
No, I wasn't splitting it by floor. I was just saying the new work that was done.
Right, but you were saying you could do it, you could limit it to just one floor if it was a facade on one floor?
If that's the only thing you wanted to change, yes. The new materials you had to use would be prescribed by the code, but you wouldn't be forced to change other things that you had no intention of updating. I understood that was what you were suggesting. So
It made sense to me until we started talking about a building material.
Well, except that it wouldn't be unusual, say
I'm
traditionally.
just thinking about it, yeah.
Oh, yeah. That for the storefront, for the main ground level, to have a different material than the upper
True
level.
enough.
You don't
Yeah.
always see that, but it's something that you wouldn't be unusual.
Yeah, I'm just processing.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's easier with certain other elements, yeah.
It is.
Yeah, that works for me.
And for me.
So how would we do it in the format it's in? Should we pull that out and make it a written statement?
well, it seems very similar to the other footnotes to me. If we could add another footnote that says that the items that are being added or changed, items or materials, something like that, must meet the code. But portions of the building that are not being altered may remain.
There you go.
So put a footnote 3 on the X under elements.
Well, no, I think it would be materials as well,
Yeah,
wouldn't it?
material, yeah.
So I would put it over on facade changes like we did on expansion of building area in this case. Put the note number.
Very good.
All right, well, I guess that gives me a little bit of relief about what was bothering me about that one. I think I'll stop there. I don't have anything else really that's ready on this one. I might be all finished. I'm definitely finished for now.
Well, I think that makes this a lot clearer in terms of what it is we're trying to do.
Oh, I'm sorry. One more that's very closely related to this. If you can turn to page 22, it should be storefront frontage.
Yep.
Darcy, do you have that?
I do.
Okay. I think we need to change the heading on the table B where it says form. This originally, I think, said elements on it. And many months ago, I pointed out that it was actually talking about more than just elements, and we decided to compromise on form. But now that we are making these terms very important in the table that we were just looking at, I think we need to change it to say elements slash height. Fenestration, the first line, ground story fenestration is elements. Transparency would be elements. Oh, storefront encroachment, actually that's placement, isn't it?
Oh,
And ground
Yeah.
story clear height is height. And facade is elements. See, what I'm thinking is, in this table that we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes, it refers to the categories: height, placement, elements, materials. And if you were to just look at this one called form, you would think it didn't apply. But these are intended to be under those other categories. Is that making sense?
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm pretty sure we have 3 different kinds in there. We have elements, height, and placement all in that table.
So we'll just put all 3.
So I don't, yeah.
So the name of the section is form, so that is incorrect as well.
Yeah, I guess it is a heading that we don't use really anywhere else. So if we want to make it consistent, that should change as well. Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone else have anything on that page?
Well, sorry. I actually, no, I see a problem there. If we just add all 3 of those to the heading, like I was saying, then it's not clear which one is which. Is that right? Maybe we need to make it clear which ones are placement. Well, one of them is placement, the third one of them is height, the fourth one, and I believe the other 3 are all elements. Because if you look at the table of what has to be done with nonconformities, for example, the minor expansion does not have to meet height or placement, but it does have to meet elements.
So just insert another row above each cluster or whatever and place a title above it instead of a title across the...
Yeah, something like that. Or else, I mean, you could make it into 3 separate mini tables. So there would be no main heading. The form heading would go away completely. And
Yeah.
there'd be one table with one line, another table with one line, and another table with 3 lines in it.
Yep, I can do that. I think that will be nicer.
All right. Okay, that's truly the last one on this.
Welcome, Mr. Haywood. I saw a flash at the top of my screen that you joined us.
Yeah, good to be here.
Thanks. We're moving on to page 6 of the administration and application process. I have one, just by way of clarification, I think that the intention is under 202A, goodness, 4D, that the intention is that those elevations would be schematic or sketched, or they wouldn't be the final sort of working drawing, call them elevations for the, given that this is the pre-application meeting.
So primary sketch elevations?
I don't know that it needs necessarily to be clarified. I just want to know that that's your if you were having a pre-application meeting, you wouldn't expect them to come, the applicant to come in, because the intention of this is for you to get a sense of, during the pre-application meeting, for staff to get a sense of what's being proposed.
Right.
So I don't know that it needs any clarification, except to say that, is that what the intention was? Primary elevations is fine.
Yeah, I have a comment.
Please, thanks. I see your hand if you.
Yeah, now that you pointed out, when I look at 4A, which is a somewhat similar requirement, it goes into quite some detail about what a concept site plan is. The elevations are sort of a complement to the site plan, and yet it really says nothing about what our expectations are, which I guess is why Dan questioned it. And it does seem as though it would help to give a little more guidance as to what level of detail is needed for D.
And maybe go ahead, Chris.
It's similar. It could almost be called concept elevations as well, in a sense.
And then, maybe even take the time, just again, whether you want to do it here or if it's something that becomes part of your policy, probably some indication of materials, either through, probably through notes, but maybe through the use of color. You would typically have some sort of dimension string that would show the height and maybe the floor to floor dimensions. Much like you've got above, lot dimensions, general footprints, that becomes the sort of the shape, and so on. I was really just trying to confirm that the expectation, because the changes that are likely to happen potentially to the site plan, but certainly to the elevations throughout the course of the building development. I mean, they're probably going to be, they won't be insignificant necessarily. And so just to sort of, if they get a pretty good idea coming out of the gate, what's intended, and it makes some minor alterations throughout the course of the project development, fine. But at least give staff an idea about what's intended, without having to go into extreme detail as to what the exact window widths are, or the column spacing, or the the pier width and so on.
Okay, come up with some language there. We'll probably model it after our current code.
Yeah, there you go. The only other comment I have about that is that this jumps ahead a page, in that the pre-application meeting, I'm jumping back then, the pre-application meeting was removed from the table, and I think that was a smart, sort of in terms of tidying up what what the table used to look like. Now it's just administrative review, planning commission review, and council review. The pre-application meeting is not, you know, an obligatory review, but it is a part of the review process, and that clearly that's going to occur as necessary. So I think that was a wise omission. Any other comments on page 6? If you're raising your hand, I can't see you.
Dave, did you have any comments on this page?
No, I'm good.
All right.
Cindy and Chris, if not, we'll move on.
Yeah, I was mostly hoping to hear from staff about these sections because it's, you know, never having been involved in these portions of it, it's kind of beyond me. So,
Well, Darcy and I went through this ahead of time considerably, so we thought we ironed out quite a bit of it. So that might be why you haven't heard from us.
So this already reflects your thinking then.
Yeah, a little bit, yep.
And if we're good with that, then I guess there's no need to linger there. Move on to page 7. Comments here?
well, I will say this is where it gets a little more interesting, and we see that some of these projects finish their approval at the planning commission, which is one of the biggest changes. And actually, I think the ones that can be approved administratively are new as well, the minor expansion and the parking lot expansion, or change in use that expands parking. So that's definitely part of the idea of streamlining the process for applicants.
Do you think these are reasonable, as the three of you think, as planning commissioner? Do you think these are reasonable changes to present from the beginning?
I think they're fine. I'll since Mr. Pearson's not here, I'll speak out perhaps on his behalf. And line 3, new development over 4 stories or footprint more than 20,000 square feet. I think we've talked about that in the past, that seemed to be the bright line between, well, as it's indicated here, the bright line between only planning commission and move on to council. I'm 100% behind the idea that the incentives pretty clearly need to go to council. But he's asked, I remember he called us out specifically in one meeting and asked us to, you know, essentially to challenge council to say, you know, ask for what you think is appropriate. And if you know, there's no reason why some additional restrictions might not be applied later. So I guess, again, if he's presuming he's not here, I'll say on his behalf, is there a reason why over 4 stories or such a large footprint doesn't, you know, if it meets all the requirements that are outlined in the form-based code, and then could it not just proceed after planning commission review?
That's up to the three of you to propose to the planning commission.
I actually thought that council member Greg, now Mayor Pro Tem Greg, had indicated perhaps that asked us to challenge them. Maybe I'm misremembering, but
No, I think you're right.
she said
I was surprised by that.
Yeah. So I put it out there just because it's, you know, it's one of those things where that's where we've decided to draw the line, or at least that's where the line is being drawn here, and that there's certainly no reason why council couldn't reestablish or establish that that last checkbox.
Well, how do you think the public would feel about that? I mean, there is that issue. It's not just council, it's opportunity for public input earlier in the process.
True. No, it's a very good point. And it really, I think, I'm not arguing for or against either way. But it really is a matter of, have we done a good job in vetting the requirements of this form-based code, that a developer or property owner that followed all the stipulations of the code could feel comfortable without, or, could feel reasonably comfortable that once it gets to council, that there's not going to be additional modifications made at that late date.
So this, just pointing out that one thing this means is that the planning commission could reject a new proposal, a new development proposal, could turn it down, prohibit it.
Oh,
I'm wondering just how that would go over the first time that happens.
Because it wouldn't go on to council after that.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But I will point out that there are quite a few, I don't know, maybe staff has a better idea than I do, but quite a few communities that do operate this way for many projects where the planning commission does make final decisions. And I assume it must work reasonably well. And furthermore, the threshold seems reasonable to me as a starting point. I certainly don't have a perfect memory of all of our recent projects, but I think this would make sure that quite a few projects would go to city council, and there would still be quite a few that would be handled more quickly by finishing at the planning commission.
So essentially that, again, presuming the footprint stays within the 20,000 square foot range, really you're talking about only projects that would be, well, I'm looking back at the minimum and maximum heights, and that in M4, the minimum height would presumably be 6 stories, and the remainder of them are 4 or less. And so if they're not asking for additional, which is to say that would require incentives, height, that everything outside of M4, that is to say M1, 2, and 3 would be, could potentially be, wouldn't require city council review. It's a pretty sizable bit of this particular zone, this new zoning. I wasn't arguing for or against. I just that was one thing that was put to us in an earlier meeting, and I think perhaps, Chris, your comment that we draw the line here or establish the line here, and from there the discussion can take place either at council or once this gets pushed out to the greater review group, we'll talk about shortly. I think that's fine. That sort of that we've called it a place where we've established a place where that that review would actually proceed on to council. Any other questions or comments on page 7? All right, page 8, last page.
Oh, actually, I just want to point out also in that table we just finished, there's one line regarding the parking lot expansion, where I think we need to change the wording again, the same as we did on the previous page. The change in use that expands the parking lot by more than 10%. So it would probably become expands the area of the parking lot by more than 10%.
Very good, thank you, Chris.
Whatever wording is consistent with what we did in the other one.
I'm assuming on that same line.
Hey, David, Mr. Haywood, I can't see you if you don't talk. So if you had your hand, I saw you had your hand raised. My device is not letting me see a gallery view. So either speak up and then I'll recognize you.
All right.
Thanks.
So on that same line, the column for planning commission review, I'm assuming we still have the authority, administration would still have the authority to kick it to the planning commission if we weren't comfortable with it. How the others have that option, that one's blank.
Yeah, we can just add that.
So column 2, planning commission column, you want it added, the administration may revert to planning commission in both of those boxes? The one that it's currently in and the one below it?
Yes.
Along the same lines, I'll point out that the line below that, providing more parking spaces than permitted, the planning commission may refer to city council for consideration. But if you go up 3 lines from that, a major expansion or more of building area, the planning commission is not allowed to refer that. And the first line, the planning commission is not allowed to refer that. Is that the way we want it, or?
I think we should have had it in all 3 or 4. 3. What do you think, everyone?
So what it would mean is that every row would end with an X under city council, except, or it would add, or it would end in a box that says may refer. Is that correct?
Correct.
So
Except
there's also one more I didn't mention, the modification to architectural element standards, which currently ends with the planning commission, and that one could potentially also be referred.
Ooh.
Doesn't the code allow the planning commission to do that?
A part of the form-based code?
Right. I thought we had that in there. That.
Wouldn't it be in this spot, or?
I don't know, Chris. I might be just thinking of this spot.
Yeah, I can't quite remember where else it might talk about that.
I'm actually comfortable with it the way it is, that in particular, the one about the modification to architectural element standards. Now, with the understanding that that's going to be theoretically triggered by some issue that the planning commission might have. I mean, do you think that the question might ultimately be we're not comfortable with recommending its approval in its current state, but we don't want to kill the project, and so we're passing it up to city council for their input? Because I'm thinking that, I mean, ultimately the intention, of course, has always been to try to move the approval or the approval, back in the timeline, or back in the project timeline. And that I'm trying to think of that with the last one in particular, a place where there might be some issue with elements or details, architectural elements and standards that the planning commission is so torn that there's, the risk is that the project might be scuttled if there isn't a higher authority to appeal to, which is maybe what you were getting at earlier, Chris, when you'd said, the planning commission could stop a project, right? Because there would be no recommendation to council. It would be approval or non-approval. But if there was a possibility that there was going to be non-approval, I don't know. It seems to then ultimately it get passed up to council. But it seems to me that's the whole point. That if the provisions are adopted, there shouldn't be any reason for there to be a dismissal.
Well,
go ahead.
Let me look at it another way. As the table's constructed now, there's one row, the one about providing more parking spaces than permitted, that allows the planning commission to refer it to city council. And there are 1, 2, 3, I guess there's 5 other ones that could end at the planning commission with no opportunity to refer them to city council. And if I look at it that way, I have to ask why would we be so concerned about more parking spaces to refer that one to city council and not be able to refer some of the others? That seems slightly out of balance to me. Just for example, a major expansion of a building, 20% or more, ends at the planning commission unconditionally. And yet providing more parking spaces than permitted, which we do routinely in the city.
So can some light be shed on why that in particular, which I agree that it does seem like a minor issue in terms of impact. Is it giving the planning commission some sort of release valve to
Yeah,
allow
and I don't
another
know
body?
why we use that particular circumstance and not the others. I don't know. I can't remember that one for sure. If that was already in place and we just never took much care to look at it, which is possible.
Well, I guess I have another comment on that one. I'm trying to look it up here, but my recollection is we don't have in the form-based code any maximum parking, do we? We simply require a parking plan.
You find it.
The parking rule will refer to our current parking code, but you're probably thinking of the B or M4 district.
No, I'm pretty sure we don't have a maximum in there.
Yeah, we do. It's section 812. It's not in the form-based code, but it's in our current standards, which this form-based code refers to.
Where does it refer to it? Part 7 is the chapter about parking, and I don't see any reference to our current code. Part 7 seems to be complete, and
I thought we've been talking all along that it was going to. It should be, if it's not. We would have developed a whole set of standards.
Yeah, I think that was just omission on our part because originally we were talking about if it wasn't specifically spelled out that it was going to be done within this code, that it was automatic that you would revert to the section.
Oh, all right.
Added in there because I think
703.
703C.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So that's where the computations of parking are found. Is that correct?
Article 8.
Yeah, and section 812 has a maximum ratio of 1.25. And an option for a waiver if they qualify.
All right.
Okay. But what about, if you look at 702, it says very clearly, within the Avenue Form District, there shall be no minimum parking requirements. That's an absolute statement. So 703C that says all other parking standards might have to do with the placement, the setback, the construction, the paving, I don't know, whatever. But it can't be setting minimums within the Avenue Farm District, not with that 702 statement. I guess it could be setting maximum.
Maximum, this is
That's
reference to maximum.
Right, but I understood staff to be saying that all of our old computations would still be in effect, and this
Well,
clearly.
I guess it would be difficult to, I guess it would be difficult to establish a maximum if you haven't established a minimum.
Because almost all of our maximums are based on the minimums.
Right.
I have a vague recollection that we talked about this once before. I seem to have forgotten where we landed.
Yeah,
Did we include anything anywhere that's similar to our current B3 prohibition on parking?
I'm sorry, what was that, Dave?
Did we include anything in this draft, anywhere in the draft? I guess would be the M4 that is equivalent to our current prohibition on parking?
no, I'm pretty sure we did not. And I think the thinking was that we've had a fair number of projects in the B3 recently that have included parking. You know, we've kind of been disregarding that or being very lax about what was required to establish the need for it.
And this would defer, oh, that wouldn't be included in that. Yeah, it is, isn't it? I can't remember. The parking for B3 is in Article 8, correct?
I don't know, but I don't think it would matter, would it? Because we would no longer have B3.
Right. But we'd have to change that.
I guess I'd have to question why we would want to do that. You know, in observing what we've done in the city, it almost seems as though we have nullified that requirement by approving so many buildings
Right.
that have parking in them.
As long as they meet the form requirement of not having parking on the first floor and things of that nature, why do we care? And they meet the requirements of walkability and.
I guess that goes back to the question about setting a maximum.
The way I understood the way the code was written, under 702, it says there's no minimum parking requirements. The applicant shall provide a parking analysis justifying the proposed parking plan. 703 talks about where it can be placed and so forth. It was my impression that the Planning Commission and Council are supposed to look at each parking plan individually and if it makes sense, approve it. And I would argue that that's pretty much what has been done in the B3 anyway. You know, in spite of our statement that there shouldn't be any, we look at the projects and if they make a good enough argument that they need it, we allow it.
Any comments?
I think ultimately this was driven by Chris's question about the note in the city council review column and whether or not that the planning commission would refer it to city council for consideration. I'm thinking that might just as well be stripped away. Again, to provide at least a little bit of certainty for somebody that's trying to work within the parameters of the code. You know, is there a danger that as they proceed through this, that there's going to, I doubt it, but that there's going to be some sort of hang up at the very end because the parking count was off?
So take that out of all of them?
I'd
Yeah, I
be
mean,
inclined,
if there's no minimum, what would we be evaluating that?
and again, because placement is included in the, right, the sort of that screening and placement, and, you know, it's got to be underground and behind a wall and so on. If those things are all met, I'm just wondering if it's, again, you know, that trying to provide some sort of potential relief for somebody that get all that, you know, get all that way, and that maybe something's not met. Or perhaps somehow subjectively the project's not going to get approved, and instead of saying you're done, providing one last bite at the apple at the either the planning commission or at the city council. Just a thought.
Well, I would say that right now, that row is irrelevant. You know, it's provide more parking spaces than permitted. There is no maximum in the code. So unless we're prepared to write a maximum in there somehow, it seems like the whole row should go. That's not where I was going originally when I pointed that out, but.
I would strike that one and the one below it too. You're providing more parking spaces than permitted. That one doesn't apply.
Yeah, that's the one I was talking about.
Well, then the one above it, the change in use that expands the parking lot. I mean,
no, I think that should stay because that's talking primarily about existing parking lots. And that's consistent with the table that's on page 5.
Agreed. Yes.
Maybe we need to make that clearer, that it would be a change in use of a non-conforming structure that expands the parking lot area by more than 10%.
I think we should add a reference back to the table then too. Table 201, see table 201 or something like that.
so
Well,
we'd be
actually-
evaluating placement on that.
You know, actually, you know, now that you point that out, the 2 rows above it are exactly the same circumstance.
Yep.
Those are both, I think, intended to refer to non-conforming structures. The major expansion and the minor expansion. As is the one below about architectural elements.
I don't know that we really need to add non-conforming to those. I think that's pretty much a given, don't you? Where with the change in use of a non-conforming, I think that helps to clarify that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, you're probably right. We would apply that to conforming structures as well, if we had any.
Right.
It will eventually.
Yeah.
There you go. That's right. Okay, I'm trying to be mindful of the time here. If there's no further discussion, or did we resolve that? Sounds like that entire row is being stricken.
Right.
Strike,
And are
right.
we still adding,
Go ahead.
we'll still have situations that, like you said, conforming on the parking expansion. So do we necessarily need to add non-conforming property to that? Because even if you aren't required to have it, if somebody wants to do it.
Sure.
Yeah.
It makes it clear that parking, expansions of parking can be approved administratively But I think you're also suggesting you would add the may refer to planning commission. Wasn't that how we started on this?
Yes.
Right, we're gonna do that, correct,
But we'll leave the wording in column 1 the same.
correct. Except for adding the area,
Yes, the area of the parking lot or something like that.
add that, right. All right, very good, got it.
All right, and then back to my original comment. I'm okay with leaving the other ones that end with the X for the planning commission. The more parking was the only one that was currently listed as being referred to city council. I'm okay with leaving the rest of them blank there.
Okay.
Right.
Any remaining comments on page 7? All right. We've got about 10 minutes left. Our agenda says we're to talk about future schedule discussion. If there are no objections to changing the orders of the day. Ms. Ordialis, Rebecca, is there anybody else waiting to have a say in, for public input?
There are no attendees.
Okay. Then I will not try to change the orders of the day. We'll not change the agenda and move on to item 4, future schedule discussion.
So the timeline that we're looking at, Dave, do you have the ability to pull it up on the screen by chance?
Yeah, give me just a second to find the email. You all see it?
Thank you. So this is kind of a conservative, or not a conservative schedule, just because it's hard to schedule, get everyone together. And I know it takes us out to February to get to city council, but just past history, like, I really think we're going to need more than one more committee meeting, so this will change again. We're going to have to look at, I'll make all these changes that we've made today, and then I'll give you a clean copy for the next meeting. So, Chris, you can figure out where we left off. And we have those items to take care of, and then we have the use, building use category to take care of. And there's been quite a few changes to that since you've last looked at it, because we had to add the rental properties, we had to add the medical marijuana. So there's been some changes that you'll want to look at. So for the next meeting, we can have the full document up until 8 done. And then we can provide 8 at the third meeting, physical meeting. Does that sound good? Will that give you enough to discuss at one meeting?
Could you say that again?
So I'm going to update the document with these changes we made today, and then you'll have the updated document for every part of the document up until section 8. And then once you're done with that, we will go on to section 8, which is the building uses that have been changed quite a bit since you've last seen them.
Yeah, I meant the timing. Which part of that would happen then? The whole document will be available for the meeting the last week in September.
Right, that would be, I'll turn that around here in the next couple days, so you'll have that. And then the very next meeting after that, we'll have to add a meeting because we lost a meeting, will be part 8.
So that would be sometime, would that be the 3rd week in October or would it be earlier?
It would hopefully be earlier.
And that would be, that would be the target for the committee finishing.
Right, well, we would take out the work session, PC work session in October and just wrap up our meetings for this and then start our work session. You can see I have quite a few and I have the ability to add one in January. I just knew that January would be a bad month to throw something brand new at council.
All right. I noticed in the legend, it allows for planning commission regular meetings, but none of those appear in the timeline.
Yeah, we can switch these around to that. Just not knowing what our agendas are going to be like.
But we do have to consider it at a regular meeting, do we not, in order to forward it to council?
Oh, yeah, you're right. I see what you're saying. So that could be the January meeting.
And are there any additional scheduled public meetings, outreach?
Those will come after all of this. So the intention with city council meetings are just to introduce them to the document and have them say, we're ready to send it out to the community. We don't want to get to them in an ordinance form yet because it's really hard to strike out and add-ons when it's in that format. So it will come back to the planning commission after city council for any of the recommendations that the community has that you want to put in to the document.
Okay, that helps a lot. I hadn't quite pictured all of that.
Agreed.
We can add that for the next meeting. It's with COVID, it's hard to determine when you can start having public meetings or how you have those public meetings with the document, whether it's Zoom, you know, and people call in or they write in or how they do that. So we'll have to discuss that as well.
All right.
Because this seems like an awfully big document to do all of it, public input remotely.
Darcy, not to belabor the point, but what's your do you have some expectations about what's going to happen on your current calendar from February to April? Council will look at, like, say, I don't know, the first couple chapters at the first meeting or something like that, or they'll just pick away at it slowly?
I would think that they will look at it all and they're going to have lots of questions and discussions about it. So whether they need 3 meetings or not, I don't know, but I wanted to have 3 meetings available to them because I imagine they're going to ask staff to make some changes or not, or ask staff for additional information and to bring it back. So it's...
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
And with them all being new to this, I expect them to need a little more time. So,
Sure.
I mean, they're all new to the whole concept.
Absolutely.
So we're going to have to really have a plan put together for those 3 meetings.
It seems as though they're going to be relying pretty heavily on, to some extent on us, the planning commission, but of course also heavily on the staff.
Absolutely.
All right. Any other questions for Darcy regarding the schedule? All right.
How about a next meeting time? you want me to have Rebecca send out email to everyone to see what is good for you?
We're looking for the week of the 28th through the 2nd.
That's correct.
All right. That worked fine. That worked just fine last time. If everybody's okay with that.
I have no commitments at this point.
Nor
I
I.
don't need it. That's an open week for me.
All right, well, I'll have Rebecca send out an email and find a time that everyone's good preference. It sounds like, Dan, is your schedule a little more restricted that week?
Only on Thursday at noon. I've got a Michigan Architectural Foundation meeting. So the rest of the week is good.
Okay, great. I'll have Rebecca send out an email then.
All right, terrific. All right. If there are no other questions, then I will call us adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
All
you,
right.
everybody.
Nice seeing you.
You too. Glad to see
Next time
you.
I'll actually have a camera and I'll see you.
Yeah, that was good.
And my clock says 3:01.
Everyone, terrific. Well done, folks.
All right. Bye.
Be
Bye-bye,
safe.
everybody.
Bye-bye.